So Lisa, what are your top 5 do's in board development?
They are rigorous recruitment, accountability, communication, leadership development, and appreciation. And we really should begin and end with appreciation, because that is what I try to instill with the groups I work with, just this continuing cycle of appreciation going back and forth between staff and board, and between staff and board members.
You know, a new board or old board, what are some great tips around rigorous recruitment?
I just want to make a few main points and recommend 2 books, both of which happen to be at the Foundation Center Library. And the first is that there are a lot of groups that approach recruitment kind of casually, so not so clear about the expectations of the board, potential board member, not so inquisitive about asking potential board members, what do you want from being on the board, because sometimes there's not a match. Sometimes people just want to come to meetings and give some good ideas, and that's about it. So clarity in recruitment, in the board's role, in what you expect, understanding what a prospective board member wants to get from being on the board is really, really important. Having recruitment be ongoing, rather cyclical. I work with a lot of groups who, let's say in September on a calendar year, they say, oh my God, we have to have new board members by December, and then it's this rush, and the people they get aren't necessarily what they need. So being clear about the board's role, about how much time they can expect to give, about what you'll do, the nonprofit will do to support them and train them. Very important. The 2 resources I want to recommend, one is a thin book called The Board Building Cycle, and it's soup to nuts on board development with some great sections on recruitment, some boilerplates, role descriptions, and also board orientations, also important part of the recruitment process. The other book is The Best of the Board Cafe, which is by Jan Masoka, and that's almost all you need in terms of board recruitment, along with leadership as governance. Governance as leadership, that's the book. My next top 5, this would be number 2, is accountability. And first of all, I think it's important to reclaim that word, because it tends to be a little pejorative, a little bit, even have a punishing undertone. But by accountability, I simply mean that there's clarity, again, looking to rigorous recruitment about the board's role. There's a clear commitment to the role. There's clarity about specific activities, so board members know what they're going to do. They do what they say they're going to do, what they've committed to do, and then they follow through and report back. And a lot of groups are a little fearful about accountability, and I think that's because the element of support and training and helping board members to be accountable is often missing from the equation. So board members don't just make their commitments and then they're kind of thrown in the deep water without support, but they're trained, they're checked in with, there's an individual process of finding out how do different board members need to be supported. Some people need a call every other day during fundraising campaign season. Some people give me my list, I'll get back to you after I've contacted everyone. So accountability with support, and then that leads into my next tip, which is communication. And I think, in terms of sort of soft skills and practices, that can be among the most challenging. So that, going back to accountability and clarity, if a board member goes MIA, missing in action, oftentimes what happens is nothing. And what I work with groups to do, particularly board leaders, is to contact the person who has dropped off the radar and just find out what's going on. Sometimes there's a change in personal situation where someone doesn't have the time anymore to really be part of the board and they're embarrassed. Sometimes if it's around fundraising, they go to make their first call, and even though their intention is good, they freeze. So they need maybe a buddy to check in with, more training. But the idea is, if something that has happened where a board member isn't following through, where there's some kind of issue, that there's a call or a meeting just to find out what's going on in a supportive, gracious way, and figure out together if what's happening is bigger than just a problem that needs to be solved or some more training around fundraising. Maybe this isn't the right time to be on the board. Maybe the individual needs a leave of absence because their spouse is really sick. But find out what's going on and agree, how are we going to move forward around this. And then I think leadership development is really important. And I actually, certainly succession around board officers, having president or chair-elect positions can be a great way to put someone in place who's right to be the next leader of the board and can learn with your current leader so that you have continuity around succession. But the other piece of leadership development that I think is often not attended to is how the board is engaged so that they lead as a board and as individual board members. So if you have a board agenda that is primarily committee reports, you're not engaging the board as a governance body as leaders. And I again want to cite Jan's book, The Best of the Board Cafe. There's a fantastic chapter called The Strategic Board Agenda that takes, what's unfortunately more of a normal board agenda like finance committee and executive director report, etc., and transforms it into a strategic agenda. So instead of a finance report, there are questions framed like, does the proposed budget reflect our mission priorities? And so the same information is conveyed, but within a strategic leadership frame, so that the board is really governing, not just hearing the numbers. So I think leadership development in a formal way, so there's technology and processes like how do we choose our board officers? And again, the board as a governing body of leaders begins with how people are recruited, as well as the just the everyday practices from how board members are engaged at meetings to how they participate in committees and their in-between meeting work. And I wanted to end on a note of appreciation. I think sometimes we get caught up in frustration or just everything we have on our to-do list and kind of forget that board members are volunteers. They have chosen to help the organization, and to appreciate that in a general way and specifically appreciate what they do as individuals and as a group goes a long way toward effective board development. And hopefully it just becomes a flow back and forth between staff and board. But I think oftentimes we forget to thank board members when they do follow through, acknowledge their energy even if they haven't quite done what we've asked them to in the way we had hoped, but they've put out the energy. And so I think a culture of appreciation goes a long way towards both developing a board to its full potential and having it be an enjoyable experience. So those are my 5 tips.